In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to lower cortisol levels naturally. When it comes to me personally, I struggled with things like DPDR, depersonalization, derealization, and you experience something like that when your cortisol is at its peak. So I experienced the pinnacle of high cortisol levels and I fixed it naturally. I did not use supplements like ashwagandha. I did not do tactics like fasting or cold showers, which in reality, all those things are actually detrimental to your cortisol levels. So that being said, I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. If you're new to the channel, my name is Alex and I help men master natural testosterone levels righteously. That being said, before I get into the tactics, let me start the video with a proper foundation using scripture. So using our King James Version Bible in Philippians 4:6-7, we have, "Be careful for nothing, or don't be anxious, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." That being said, before I get into the tactics, let me first get into the signs of high cortisol. Because first of all, you need to know what your current state is and what your desired state is. And once you know those two things, you can use a vehicle to take you from that current state to your desired state. So before we get into the tactics, let me present to you all the signs of high cortisol levels that you may be experiencing. So let's get into it. So exercise increases cortisol if not done correctly and will have side effects such as muscle catabolism, catabolism meaning breaking down, anabolism would be building. So if training is not done properly, it can lead to actually muscle atrophy, catabolism. Another slow and inadequate muscle recovery, elevated prolactin, estrogen, and serotonin. So the reason why prolactin spikes is because prolactin is a good indicator of tissue level of estrogen and serotonin, hence why these two go together. Slow metabolism, and a slow metabolism meaning you have lower thyroid hormones meaning you are producing less things of like pregnenolone, which are precursor to testosterone. Decreased detoxification, meaning that your liver is not functioning at its peak, which makes a lot of sense because cortisol levels spike when liver glycogen stores are depleted. I'll get into that more later. Stubborn belly fat and things like that, because when you have high cortisol levels, you're usually running on your gluconeogenesis, which is you're breaking down your muscle tissue. If you ever seen people who do fasting for days, they lose more muscle than they lose actual fat tissue. Symptoms of high cortisol include inability to sleep, because you have insomnia, your body can't relax. Just like with your body, when you see a dead person, extreme example, right? They're stiff because your body needs energy to relax. Just like with your mind, if you don't have enough energy production, you get anxious. Your mind gets stiff and it can't relax. So one of the signs of high cortisol is inability to sleep because your mind is wired. Irritability. You're very irritable. Weight gain around midsection. Muscle weakness. Cognitive dysfunction, mentally and physically fatigued. Inability to detox, I already mentioned that. Tiredness after a meal due to insulin resistance. And if you're running on stress hormones and you have a meal which lowers your stress hormones, you're going to notice the difference. You feel more relaxed. Maybe sometimes if you have a breakfast, a lot of individuals are constantly running on stress. So when they wake up in the morning and they have breakfast, they feel tired. Hence why they start intermittent fasting, which makes it even worse without actually fundamentally fixing the issue. Next, we have things like blurry vision and eye floaters, low testosterone and struggle to build muscle. Hypothyroid, so low thyroid hormones, struggle to digest food properly. Because the saying, rest and digest, when you're constantly under stress, your body can't digest food properly. serotonin symptoms. I made videos about serotonin, go check them out. Stubborn lower belly, lower back and face fat. High blood pressure, increased thirst and salt craving. Symptoms of a stress response. So a sign that stress is kicking in, cold hands and feet. Sweating under your arms even though you're feeling cold normal. Feeling clammy, especially your feet, even though you're feeling cold normal. Experiencing neck tightness, twitchiness and slight tremor. Want to clench your jaw to get rid of the tension. Have slight, moderate and severe anxiety. Feeling tired but wired. Heat wave flushes, anger fits and being frustrated. Being easily triggered. Eyes being light sensitive. Can't look people in the eye. So I've seen this a lot with clients. When you improve their testosterone levels and their hormone production, they can have eye contact properly. They can communicate with individuals. Restless and voice fluctuation. So if you said to yes to any of these symptoms, you're probably experiencing, and you may be experiencing, high cortisol. Next, let me just set a foundation for you to really understand what cortisol is, why it's bad for you, and things like that. So cortisol is a stress hormone because it is released during stressful situations. So blocking respiratory energy production in cell can lead to cell death, and this effect is caused by substances like cortisol. So if you're not optimizing your energy, you'll spike cortisol. Estrogen triggers the production of cortisol. So if you have excess body fat, you have more body fat, which means you have more aromatase. So if you're doing tactics to boost your testosterone levels, a lot of that testosterone is getting converted into estrogen, which is boosting your cortisol furthermore. And then estrogen inhibits thyroid function, which then, and hypercortisolism and hypothyroidism often occur together and contribute to the loss of lean body mass. So high estrogen, lower thyroid function, less pregnenolone, things like that. Mearson found that cortisol and free fatty acids released during stress harm our energy production systems. So it's all tied together. So cortisol increases tryptophan, which increases serotonin. So tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin. Your body uses the tryptophan hydroxylase enzyme to convert tryptophan into serotonin. And cortisol does that. Here's an example that a lot of you may relate to. When your liver glycogen runs out, you send out a surge of adrenaline, which squeezes the last bit of glycogen from your liver. When your liver can't respond to the adrenaline anymore, signs of liver glycogen depletion include shakiness and cold from the high adrenaline. It resorts to high cortisol levels, which begin breaking down your tissues, turning protein into glucose through gluconeogenesis. And then after a day of high cortisol, first your body breaks down your thymus gland, which will be dissolved due to the intense exposure of cortisol. And when the quickly dissolved tissues are gone, like the thymus, over the course of a week of you not replenishing your glycogen stores, your muscles will atrophy. People who fast for a week, for example, like I mentioned earlier, lose more muscle than fat. And this is the reason why a lot of people wake up during the night. A lot of people I've noticed have issues with waking up at night. And the reason why that is because their liver glycogen stores are being depleted. Their body spikes adrenaline, cortisol, and they wake up. And sometimes they can't fall asleep. So a tactic for that is having some sugar, salt beside your bed to drink straight away to shut down the stress response, and then you'll be able to go back to sleep. Let me give you more context. So many drugs in the market are actually targeting the enzyme 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1. This is the enzyme that synthesizes cortisol. So this enzyme produces cortisol, and inhibiting that enzyme, so stopping that enzyme from doing its thing and effectively lowering cortisol, has been shown to lead to weight loss regardless of the diet. So just lowering cortisol will improve progress with your physique. I remember when I was getting certified in nutritional and personal training, and when my instructor said this is where I started being more cautious of there's more to fat loss, muscle building, all those things than just calories in versus calories out. And he said, oh, I had a client, like he was saying, the instructor, I had a client, she was training every day, doing all this cardio, eating in a caloric deficit, but she wouldn't be able to lose fat or anything. She was actually gaining. And he told her to take a week off. And when she did that, she lost a bunch of weight. And you would ask yourself why that is. And the reason is because of the cortisol. She dropped her cortisol levels. So she was able to fix her hormones. And ultimately, when you fix your hormones, then you can fix your hormones to lose fat. Don't lose fat to fix your hormones. Okay? Ray Peat always said, a thyroid deficiency in men typically causes a high ratio of cortisol to testosterone, with a tendency to convert testosterone into estrogen. Thyroid, pregnenolone, aspirin, and a diet that includes liver about once a week helps to improve those ratios. Whenever aldosterone gets activated, which aldosterone is responsible for sodium regulation to hold on to the sodium that's being flushed out the system, you will have an increase in cortisol, which leads to vascular stiffness. So that's another thing. Consuming more salt in your diet will lower cortisol levels. A pure protein meal, the sudden falling of blood sugar causes a surge of cortisol production. So cortisol spike, and it's high in times of when you're in a state of low blood sugar. When you eat protein, which is very insulinogenic, when you do spike insulin, any blood sugar that you have in your blood gets shuttled into the cells. And if you're just eating protein and you're not replenishing that glucose, that's going to drop your blood sugar. That's why maybe you've noticed if you consume a just protein meal, you might get shaky or anxious afterwards. Hence why I do recommend, if you're consuming 20 grams of protein, you want at least 40 grams of carbohydrates. Okay? Because that's important. There's another example of this where Ray Peat was talking about how he used to consume a kefir, which has lactic acid. And lactic acid, when you consume it, it needs to go to the liver to be changed back into glucose. And that's wasting the glucose which is in the liver. So it's a deficit process. And you would get migraines. Migraines are usually high serotonin, low blood sugar. So paying attention to those things, if you're eating specific foods, chocolate has leucine, which is an amino acid, which is very insulinogenic. So being careful of those things, they can spike your cortisol levels. The cortisol helps to direct the fat deposition to your waist area, back and face, Cushing or metabolic syndrome. High cortisol is associated with low testosterone, so it's always wise to keep your cortisol low. I made a post about righteous rest. Before I get into the tactics, let me go over this post. Overall, I'm going to leave this document down below so you can have access to this. So here's some things you can start by optimizing your cortisol, lowering your cortisol, by looking at it from a biblical point of view. First of all, you want to look at it from a physical rest. So the Bible emphasizes rest, right? Actual physical rest. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, for in 6 days the Lord did it. So physically resting, not training. A lot of guys train 6 times a week and they forget, even though they're training a different muscle group, you're still training the same nervous system. Hence why there's studies showcasing that training full body 3 times a week boosted testosterone levels by 40% in 4 weeks. Training every day can be actually very detrimental to your testosterone levels because you're spiking your cortisol. Then there's mental rest. So the Bible talks about mental rest, things like that. So mentally, getting rid of, so define mental by casting their burdens upon God, seeking God's presence and trusting Him can bring mental peace and elevate anxieties. So reading scripture, very powerful. There's emotional rest. There's sensory rest, which is not being constantly stimulated. You need to let your mind sit in peace and let it think, let it go through all the thoughts. I made a huge mistake of like constantly like listen to music, constantly listen to something, have one earphone in, but you're not letting your mind to really digest all those thoughts. So a big thing for me would be, I tell my clients to have a low screen time. Another thing, on their phone, I tell them to set it up in a way that the screen is black and white, so you're not getting so stimulated. Not having any apps on your phone. So I don't have any apps. So this is the screen of my apps. The only apps I have is counting my calories and things like that, you know. And on my Safari, blocking websites, things like Instagram and YouTube. So that's one. Social rest. Then there's creative rest, spiritual rest. So I'm not going to go in depth into all those things, but I do recommend you check this out. This is in my community. You don't have to join it to read this. I'll leave the link in the document. So that being said, let's get into the good stuff and the actionable tactics that you're waiting for. So steps to lower cortisol. I know this may be quite complex, but I need to set the foundation properly so you kind of understand, because the last thing you want to do is just do random things because someone told you. I want you to understand it, because when you understand it and you watch some TikTok videos of some guy telling you take this supplement to lower your cortisol levels, or you won't get thrown off because your understanding is firm, you know. So number one, don't be in an energy deficit, because when you're in an energy deficit, cortisol spikes, which leads to gluconeogenesis, right? What do I mean by an energy deficit? I'll get into that in a sec. So fundamentally, your body needs LDL cholesterol, vitamin A, and thyroid to produce pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is a precursor from here to things like DHEA, testosterone. So it all starts within the cell. Cortisol spikes when you're not consuming enough glucose for your liver to then utilize, because no glucose in the liver, no T4 being the inactive form of thyroid. So if there's no glucose in the liver, T4 can't be converted into T3, so there's no pregnenolone, there's no testosterone, and that leads to you having high stress hormones, which then leads to other detrimental things, right? So fundamentally, to lower cortisol levels within the body, you don't want to be in an energy deficit, right? Things like fasting, cold therapy, what was it? Like ashwagandha. So fasting, for instance, that puts you in an energy deficit because you're eating in a caloric deficit, you're running on stress hormones, so that's going to spike your cortisol. Cold therapy is going to put you in an energy deficit. Ashwagandha, the reason why ashwagandha works because it's an adaptogenic herb. It brings your body to homeostasis in times of stress. The problem with ashwagandha is you get used to it and then you need more and more. Fundamentally, to lower your stress, you need to ask yourself, why am I stressed out? And you need to fix that issue, right? So let's start with the foundations. Eat easily digestible foods like sugar, honey, fruit juice, fruit, coconut oil, gelatin. Because when you're eating easily digestible foods, your body can take them in and use them to battle the stressors. For you not to be in an energy deficit, you need to be consuming enough calories per day. Here's a simple example. Take your weight in pounds and multiply it by 15. That's how many calories you should consume. It's not 100%. So I want you to track your weight for 2 weeks and check how your weight changes within those 2 weeks. If your weight decreased by 1 pound per week, you're in a 3,500 caloric deficit per week. So you need to increase your daily intake by 500 calories. If your weight increased too much, vice versa. So you calibrate, right? So once you know what your caloric maintenance is, eat that every day to fuel your body, because your body is a self-healing organism if you give it resources to do so. And it can only do that when it's in a state of at least anabolism. It cannot be in a state of catabolism, which is being in a caloric deficit, right? And divide your macros accordingly. 25% fats, 20% protein, 55% carbohydrates. Carbohydrates coming from things like sugar, honey, fruit juice, then fats, coconut oil, then protein, gelatin, good protein like eggs, dairy, and things like that. And this is fundamentally, this is actually hard to do. A lot of guys just want to take a supplement. Oh, let me take ashwagandha, let me do this. But that's not going to fix your underlying issue. The reason why you're running on stress hormones is because you're not eating enough. And the excuse of like, oh boy, I can't. Like, if you want your life to be hard, do what is easy. If you want your life to be easy, do what is hard. So it's a decision you can make. But fundamentally, this is the way to go, right? I wish I can give you some tactic that you can take a supplement or do some weird meditation, but that's not going to help, because science says otherwise. Science being the true study of God's creation. And when you look within the cell, the reason why cortisol spikes is because you're in a caloric deficit, and your body spikes cortisol to break down your muscle tissue into glucose so you can fuel your body properly, right? The reason why things like meditation or ashwagandha helps is because it lowers your maintenance of calories. For you needing less glucose per day, meaning you need less cortisol per day, but that's not fixing the issue. And the reason why things like coffee or stimulants or training or working makes you maybe anxious or stressed out is because it increases your metabolic rate. It increases the need for calories. And if you're not replenishing it, you will run into stress issues. I see a lot of guys, when they drink coffee, they're stressed out. But I have my clients drinking coffee before they go to sleep. And you're probably shocked. But fundamentally, when you understand it, coffee is used to increase energy. What does it do? Coffee increases energy. The reason why people get into stress and have high cortisol from coffee is because they're not eating enough. So the cortisol spikes because coffee increases the utilization of glucose within the body. And if you don't have enough glucose, your body's going to spike cortisol for you to go through gluconeogenesis and then produce more glucose. But if you have enough glucose, your liver is fueled, you've had enough food throughout the day, and you have coffee, it's going to increase your energy. It's going to calm your mind. You're going to sleep deeper. You're going to feel better. And this is crazy, and no one talks about this. Same things like stimulants, training, things like that. So fundamentally, it starts with proper energy production within the body and fueling your body. Consuming plenty of salt on top of that, and eating regularly throughout the day. Not allowing yourself to be in a state of low glucose. Because when you get into that state, it's like you have a scar. And every time you get into that state, you're scratching the scar back up. But you need that scar to heal. So you can't allow yourself to be in that hypometabolic state. Because that's telling your body you're in a state of stress. So you constantly have to do it. Let me give you an example. So there was obese individuals who precisely woke up every 60 minutes at night with a very powerful nightmare. And that was rooted because their liver glycogen stores were depleted. So what they did was they set an alarm every 45 minutes just before the stress hormones kick in, and they would fuel themselves with salt, sugar, and they would do that for a couple of nights, and every night the period was longer until they were able to properly heal themselves. So that's another thing. Consume plenty of salt, no screen time, no FAP, and music. So being on no FAP, not burning your dopamine receptors, because when you do that, you become more anxious and things like that. I gave you the sleep example. Don't use things like ashwagandha, don't fast, don't do any cold showers. Stick to the basics, which is your nutrition. And this fundamentally will fix your issues. And the reason why you don't want to be consuming things like problematic foods or starches is because within your gut, you have gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. When you're consuming foods and you're in a state of high cortisol, hypothyroidism, you have a harder time to digest foods, meaning the foods that you're eating travel further down into the digestive tract, letting the gram-negative bacteria to feed on those undigested food, and the gram-negative bacteria have a lipopolysaccharide within the shell, which sheds, which is called endotoxin, and endotoxin that sheds off increases things like serotonin, stress, so on and so forth. Hence why you want to be eating easily digestible foods that digest very quickly. The reason why I recommend things like white sugar is because it's very easily digestible. Ultimately, you want to eat fruit. When you are consuming white sugar, make sure you're eating things like oysters, liver, you're supplementing properly, fixing micronutrient deficiencies. So that's another thing with optimizing your hormones, is fixing micronutrient deficiencies, but that's more complex, which I can't really go over in these videos, but overall fixing those. And you can use white sugar accordingly. So that being said, if I was to have DPDR again and I would have super high stress hormones, this is exactly what I would do. On top of that, I would add a raw carrot salad with coconut oil and vinegar, white vinegar, because it attaches to all the endotoxins and flushes them out. As well, your body flushes out estrogen through the liver, through urine or bile. When it goes through the bile and you're in a state of hypometabolic rate, your digestive tract is more permeable, which allows the bile to be, the estrogen get back into the system. So you need a constant flow of undigestible fiber, which come from carrots, constantly every day to flush everything out. So the combination of the raw carrot salad, the fruits, the sugar, eating plenty of food, eating in a caloric maintenance at least, not stimulating yourself, doing everything properly. I would do that exact thing if I were to have DPDR again. And I would be healed very quickly. That being said, if you're someone that wants to take the guesswork out of all of those things and want to fix yourself right now, you have high cortisol levels, maybe you have low testosterone levels, and you want to join my Reclaim Mastermind and be coached personally by me 101 in my mastermind, as I have here. Down below, I'm going to leave a link that you can book a call and we can chat. I'll see if you're a good fit. I'll see if I can help you. If so, I'll present to you what I have to offer and how that works. And then at the end, you can make a decision whether you want to be part of it or not. So that being said, I hope this video was of value to you. And yeah, God bless and adios.